Okay, let's talk about Starfield. Ever since Bethesda announced this title, there's been quite a bit of hype for the game that was touted as the first new universe from the studio in 25 years. The hype for this game was immense, and somewhat controversial, as it would be the first game from Bethesda since the Microsoft acquisition, and it would be platform locked to Xbox and PC only for the foreseeable future. Expectations were quite high that this would be Bethesda's masterpiece game, and quite frankly, it was expected that this would be an easy game of the year. So does Starfield meet those stellar projections, or is it sucking on vacuum? For those that just need the quick and dirty thumbs up or down, for better or worse, this is a Bethesda game. All the trappings are here. Pick up the main story, try to get to do main story, get sidetracked because you picked up another quest or saw something that seemed to be more interesting than what you are doing in the main story. Along the way, you're going to pick up various amounts of loot, encounter NPCs who want to talk to you about a new quest that may or may not distract you from the current quest you're doing, level up perks, build outposts, build ships, and generally do all the things that you remembered you did in previous Bethesda games. If you enjoyed Bethesda's previous offerings, this is an easy recommendation, at least from my perspective as someone who has been pretty lukewarm on Bethesda games since Fallout New Vegas, might possibly rate as one of my favorites from the studio. Shooting mechanics are very similar to Fallout 4's. Bethesda has done their best to tighten up the shooting even more and have given a wide variety of guns to play with. Shotguns, SMGs, pistols, rifles, grenade launchers, and all of these also have different varieties of ammunition types. Laser, ballistic, a non-lethal version called EM, and explosive. Lots of different options for you to really mess around with, and most of the guns feel just different enough that you'll find your preferences fairly quickly. Space combat is a new addition to the standard combat formula, and it's very arcadey. The auto aim for your weapons is pretty generous and doesn't take much to track and shoot down a moving ship. Missiles have a lock-on time, but I never felt like it took a long time to get that lock, even with the missiles that are available without skill ups. There are again a variety of different weapons, fall into 4 categories: missile, ballistic, energy, or EM. Energy does well against shields, ballistic does well against ship hulls, missiles track after set lock-on, and EM can disable subsystems on the ship for boarding actions or just temporarily knock out those subsystems for easier combat. Movement is also fairly similar to previous Bethesda games, but there is an added option of having the booster pack to give you a little bit more verticality and mobility in combat and exploration. There are some areas where the booster pack is used to propel you around in low gravity, but these areas are pretty few and far between, and I encountered them in set pieces where the low gravity is trying to drive you to a puzzle solution for a quest. Ship movement is pretty fun and leads towards accessibility versus being a simulation. Depending on the layout, mass, the engines that you have for your ship, and how much power you are allocating to that part of your ship, it's going to alter how your ship feels in space. There's not too many obstacles there to really test your flying skills for the most part, unless you are in combat, in which case you will be spinning around, juking around on the higher difficulties, as the game tends to throw more ships at you in order to account for your ship very likely being of a better quality build. So overall, it feels okay. Above average even. Most of the guns at least feel like they have good feedback on audio and recoil. Sometimes I felt like I was actually doing a lot of Halo-esque combat puzzle stuff with the booster pack, hopping around, getting different angles, hopping up to create distance between me and some nasty alien raptor. But here's where the Bethesda DNA and open world RPGs in general have issues with combat design. Difficulty equals higher HP pools. I noticed that as enemies got higher in level, they didn't really change their tactics. They just got harder to kill with lower end weaponry, and they hit a little harder. Most alien life forms on different planets, while they looked a little bit different, still generally followed the same logic of running at you and trying to smash your head in. What this resulted in was if you turn up the difficulty, then you end up just kind of abusing the simplistic AI and sitting around on corners or abusing line of sight and just kind of plinking away at them. The space combat was pretty fun for me. Changing power to different subsystems while flying gave me a fun little challenge of trying to balance out mobility, defense, and offense while trying to control movement. On higher difficulties, I found that the damage output from multiple ships at once kind of was unfair. A lot of the times they have so much ordnance that they can shoot you faster than your repair kit can heal you. And since at the very beginning of the fight, you normally start out head to head, there's sometimes very little opportunity for you to break that line of sight And if you're not careful, you end up with a couple of frustrating deaths without really understanding what you did wrong. So open world traversal this go around is a lot less seamless. There are a lot of loading screens. Changing a planet, loading screen. Need to go into a building to talk to a vendor, loading screen. Getting into a ship, loading screen. While you can roam around on the planets kind of seamlessly, the procedural generation just doesn't give me a whole lot of reason to stay on a planet for more than half an hour maybe, unless I need to do a quest there. And honestly, even if you do enter most of the areas that are marked by a waypoint on these planets, you are very likely to hit a load screen. Exploration just isn't as incidental as it was in previous Bethesda games. Because you aren't interacting directly, i.e. pushing the stick to walk from place to place, when you go to a different POI, whether that's on the ground or in space, there's just less chances of you encountering something that takes you on a whirlwind adventure. At least for me, I just kind of use the fast travel to get from area to area and would use the star map to hop between systems when I needed to. Conversely, I don't recall getting so many rumors and background dialogue in the cities that would point me to potential new quests in previous games. It definitely existed, but just walking through New Atlantis in my first playthrough, I remember getting multiple quest pop-ups that looked like they were substantial storyline quests and not just procedurally generated kind of radiant quests. My suspicion is that maybe being in the populated areas is supposed to replace some of that discovery that you used to get when you would run from city to city in Skyrim or Fallout. It's an okay replacement, but I do miss some of that incidental contact with something potentially interesting that could happen out in the wild. But it does appear that may have been accounted for, and honestly, this makes it pretty easy to accumulate things to jump into just whenever you receive it, and if it's interesting to you, then you can kind of chase that. Very, very similarly to how in Skyrim or Fallout, where if you just saw something kind of weird happening out in the open world, you would just go and look at it. Now, something that we have to talk about, because I think this actually heavily impacts why I didn't explore as much inside of this game and why I feel like the game doesn't really actively push you to exploring, is that there is a startling lack of a map while you are on foot. There's a map screen that shows you the POIs, but there is no detailed map of anything. Basically, the only kind of detailed map there is the star map, and it's space, so it just shows you the planetary bodies, but there's no map while you're on foot. I think it's probably the worst design decision that they decided to make in this game. I think it really hinders your ability to explore an area because there's no frame of reference really for where you have been and where you want to go to, especially if it's not linked to a POI or a quest. And some of the larger areas like New Atlantis can be really, really confusing to navigate just because there's no way for you to use the waypointing system to mark like a vendor or a district that you want to go to. Basically, if it's not linked to a quest or the game hasn't given you a waypoint to go to, you have to figure it out yourself. So for ship and outpost building, I kind of have to confess something. I didn't do that much outpost building. I spoke with a friend who has gotten kind of deep into it, and the consensus is that it can get very, very detailed and deep, but unfortunately, I can't really speak to that portion of the game. The shipbuilding, though, oh man, I spent hours on this. There'd be times when I would be on a quest line, and I wanted to just make a small change because it's something I noticed while I was flying it around or when it was docked, and I would end up spending the next hour tweaking, upgrading, swapping parts out so I can try to get a certain look, or there's some stat point that I wanted to increase. Barring some small gripes with the game just not kind of telling you that there are certain operations available to you, such as double clicking on your ship to select all the parts, I really, really enjoyed the shipbuilding. There are some basic design constraints the game kind of forces on you that are relatively easy to fulfill. Just things like, hey, you don't have enough landing gear, or hey, you don't have enough reactor stat in order to power your engines, or hey, your engines are not powerful enough to push your ship, or you're a little too heavy. But outside of those kind of basic design constraints, you're kind of able to very easily mix and match the parts, as long as they're available to you, of course, in order to get the style of ship that you want. I've already seen a couple of Reddit posts as well as just kind of images of people using the unmodded game to make things like the Starship Enterprise or an X-Wing or the Firefly ship. I mean, it's just really cool. I really, really enjoyed this aspect, and it's a great addition. And of course, the color scheming is pretty nuts. You can design each and every single piece of the ship separately to have its own color scheme, or you can kind of theme the ship just by
selecting all the parts and, moving some sliders around in order to get the right color that you want.
I'm going to try to avoid spoilers in this section, but here's your warning if you are sensitive to that. For the main story, I found it to be a little slow-paced, especially in the beginning and around the last third of the questline. There are some moments that devolve to just going to find the magic MacGuffin because we told you to go look for it, and there's not much exposition for these moments outside of some dialogue from the companion that you brought with you at the time. But the payoff to the main story was honestly very, very cool. And I was very, very surprised that the game decided to actually give me some feedback on major side quests that I completed. How this basically plays out is that at the end of the game, you are given a decision to either go to a New Game Plus or stay in your current playthrough / universe. But in the room that you are making the decision, you can walk over to representations of the storylines that you completed, and the game will expound on the ripple effects of these decisions. For example, in my particular playthrough, it revealed that my work on the UC Terramorphs questline led to a greater cooperation between the factions because I chose to spread a species that hunted the Terramorphs down instead of choosing the position of releasing a bioengineered virus that would kill off the Terramorphs. This was something that Bethesda started doing in the Fallout games, and I'm glad that it's been brought forward to this game as well. While it's not as cool as experiencing the aftermath for yourself, the fact that the game acknowledges that there are far-reaching consequences to your actions that can ripple across time and space is a really interesting philosophical point that kind of leads into the whole idea of why you are undertaking the main quest line to begin with. World building is something that Bethesda has always done very well. They often fill its worlds with bits and bobs that try to lend life to the environment, and the exposition always helps build the history of the universe and gives gravity and context to what you're currently doing. One of my favorite moments in this game is when I was walking through a museum through an early UC questline, and I was able to find out how the universe's factions came to be and what were some of the pivotal moments of their history that led to how things were now. My biggest recommendation to anyone who's thinking about getting this game is that you don't consider this a space exploration game. This is an open world RPG that is set in space. This game has more in common with Mass Effect than it does with No Man's Sky, has more in common with Star Fox than it does with Star Citizen. Exploration and space are more themes that the game uses to suit its narrative and world building than they are the focus. So, to round this all out, there's a lot of criticisms, but to be honest, this is probably one of my favorite Bethesda games of all time. The game is flawed. I don't think that anyone can say that this game is at all perfect. It does some things inelegantly. There are customization pieces that they removed that were present in previous Bethesda games but aren't present here. There's no map. The UI can be anywhere from average to downright frustrating to interact with, and the wait system continues to be a chore. But at the end of the day, I wanted to keep playing it. It's very rare for an open world RPG to hold my attention and to still continue to hold space in my head even after seeing the credits. But despite all of the flaws, I kept finding myself being intrigued with the world and wanting to engage with its various systems. The story and world are fantastic, and since Bethesda doesn't have to abide by existing settings like in the Fallout and Elder Scrolls games, they're free to really go nuts here and show yet again that they're the ones who ignited the craze for open world RPGs that people have been chasing for years. So in short, it's flawed, but it's good. Pick this one up.
Captain, it is pleasant to
Wow. That's really nice looking. Very moody. It's very, very Blade Runner-esque. Or cyberpunk,
There's
I guess.
nothing in the settled systems.
I don't know how much
Crazy,
people watch
terrible, but never
sci-fi
dull
movies.
here.
Of anyone who might have watched these streams later.
There should be a sign, dump your Aurora here. You'd make a fortune if you put a net right under here. I'm not even kidding.
Don't move, Nesha!
I want to know what Aurora is.
Cut the act. Sniffers picked up the Aurora you're carrying the second you step through.
All right, get up slowly and turn around. Try to run, and we
I want to see
open
this.
fire.
Is he gonna try to run? Please try to run.
So, what was the plan, Nesha?